Been watching ball with my big old brain and think the tape needs some explaining. Studying the stats to understand it. Hey, yo.
Talk data to me. Talk data to me.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to episode 12. 12, Freedman, of Talk Data to Me. And as you guys can see on the screen, we've got the great Matthew Freedman, the Oracle, as some of you may know him, and we are going to talk about some fun stuff today. Guys, we're going to look at how do you actually go about making good NFL bets. And the way we're going to do that is, I hear Freedman snickering already because, look, betting's not easy. Betting's hard. Finding, the right things to bet on is not easy. But Freedman, man, you've spent a lot of time digging into it. And so the way we're going to handle this today is we are actually going to look at 5 bets for this weekend, and then we're going to walk through the reasoning behind each one of those bets. So this is really meant to be an evergreen kind of show, but we know some of you are degenerates and you just want bets for this weekend too. So we want to use it as an opportunity, and then it'll also let you dunk on us when we're wrong.
Right.
Or I should say when Freedman's wrong, because Freedman's going to be the captain of this show. So Freedman, welcome in, and I'm going to start you off with a zinger, and I know you don't like this one because I think the rest of the show you're going to be talking about things really being a cumulative, impact as you think about the way that the betting model that you have built for fantasy life works. But my top question to you is this: based on your research and experience, what is the number one factor that you think betting markets might be missing or underrating that can give players an edge?
It's a good question. Injuries. I would say it's injuries, because everyone can, or not everyone, but a lot of professional bettors, they have their power ratings. They have their research on what home field advantage is worth. They, research home away splits, travel, all of that. But injuries, that's the thing that changes every week. So you've really got to be on the ball for that. And you have to create, values for what all of these different players are worth. So it's not just, do you have a sense of the 52 guys on each NFL roster? It's, do you have a sense of what that guy is actually worth to the team? So it's a massive undertaking. And I would say if there's, any sort of alpha that I've had over the past, 5 years of having a model, it has been in doing the grind of looking at the injuries and kind of thinking about what a guy is worth and making those adjustments to the spread. So yeah, I would say injuries, and there's no shortcut around that. You just have to do it.
It's a grind. We talk about it a lot. So Freedman and I are on the data team at Fantasy Life, and one of the things that's the most difficult to really figure out how to fully automate, that's one of them. We have our data scientist Alex looking at that sort of thing. So it's something that, to your point, everyone has to kind of get in there in the weeds and do the manual nitty gritty work, because just because a player's hurt doesn't necessarily mean that they might have already been the second string tackle. And so how are you accounting for that? That's the big thing that becomes kind of, a little more complex with the injury stuff, is when you start getting multiple layers deep. And then the other big thing I love from you, Freedman, is, one of the things you started talking with me about a couple of years ago, it's the cluster injury impact. So it's not you have one starting offensive lineman out, for example. You're the freaking Chargers and you've got both your starting tackles out. Rashawn Slater, right? Which you lost in the preseason. And this is kind of a good example of how that stuff works. Then he gets replaced by Trey Pipkins. Well, now he is also out. He might be back this week. And then you look at the other starter on the opposite side, Joe Alt. They lost him in week 4. Yeah. And then they've had other guys in and out of the lineup over that period. So when you get that kind of massive impact, talk about that real quick.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And so, and it can be compounded by even, all right, Joe Alt normally plays on the right side, but now they're moving him to the left side. So there's an impact there. As you mentioned, Trey Pipkins with the injury, and then Jamari Sallier, who is backup playing tackle. He can play a lot of positions, but he was backup playing tackle. He was injured at one point. And then Austin Deculus, who's the number 5 tackle on the team.
No one knows who these people are.
He was in and out of the game last week with injuries. And it's this cumulative impact to where it's not just, Rashawn Slater is worth, 3/4 or a point against the spread, and Joe Alt is worth half a point against the spread. Like there's a like a sort of multiplicative impact to where more guys in a position group who are out, the more you need to add on this sort of extra deduction against that position group or against that unit. So there's definitely like a cumulative downstream, sort of like downhill impact where the more guys who are injured, the more overall you have to deduct in addition to what those guys separately are worth against the spread.
Yeah, which, just a quick sidebar is what makes what Dak has been doing so impressive,
Yes.
Even though the Cowboys have dealt with multiple injuries along the offensive line. So not to be Dallas Cowboy homers, we're going to put a complete, wet blanket on that here in a minute, guys. So Freedman, you have built the NFL betting game model at Fantasy Life. A lot of you have probably not seen it yet. This is really our first version of the tool, but I think the key thing for you to know here is like all of this work that Freedman puts into it. And also shout out to our data scientist, Alex. He helps out Freedman with this as well and does a lot of the back end work. And they talk a lot about the model and go back and forth. And so it's really interesting, though, as we started getting ready for this show, and you and I were kind of DMing each other back and forth yesterday in Slack. Like we just started having this natural like conversation, and we were just kind of like, it was like Seinfeld. It's like, this is the show. This is the show. It's a show about nothing, but it's a show about everything. So like the show just kind of came away in this like organic way. But I'm going to put it up on the screen for you guys here real quick. And what you'll see, and Freeman, you can jump in here too as well. But ultimately on the left, you've got the games, and then you've got the spread, the money line, and then the total. And your number to the far left is the actual line. Mm-hmm. The number under it is the delta between that number and this projection, which is the number from Fantasy Life. And so in our betting model, what Freedman has done, as an example, you just heard about the injuries, that's built in there. But what we're going to do for you guys today is we're going to walk through the 5 favorite bets Freedman has. Freedman's favorites. You guys know Freedman's favorites. So we're going to walk through Freedman's 5 favorites, but we're going to really talk about why. Where do these edges come from? But generally speaking, when you're looking at the tool, as a good rule of thumb, right, Freedman, would be when folks see more stars, the better. Right. So if you see 4 or 5 stars, that's something you would probably consider betting. But the key number is the number that's under the number to the left of the column, because that's telling you the edge and then the stars. So anything that you want to add here, Freedman?
No, I think you summed it up. And, we're still, like anything, always making adjustments, always tinkering on stuff. I think, always iterating. But yes, normally the higher the stars, the better, like the bigger the edge that we would see for that bet.
Okay, sweet. So let's dive into our first game here. We're just going to go with the one at the top. And you've actually got 2 5-star bets on this game, Freedman. One is on the total. So this is the New York Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. And so one is on the total, which is setting at -7.5 for the Eagles. But you've actually got this at -11. So that's a 3.5 edge. And then we've got the total, which is also a 5-star bet. You've got it projected at 46.4 versus 43.5 for the market, which is a 2.9 delta between those two numbers. So let's start here with the actual spread. And let's talk to folks about what are the factors within the model, because the broader lessons here, guys, you can learn these things. We just come use the model, like it's going to help you. But there's like life lessons here that Freedman's going to share with you as you're thinking about, as a bettor, how you start to look for the edges that you can potentially use, to gain leverage in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, let's start with the spread. And the starting point is always the power ratings. Like what do we think this team is worth? And so for the power ratings for the Eagles, we have them as 5.25 points better than the average team on a neutral field. That's the number 3 team in our power ratings. And then the Giants, we have it -4.25 as the number 26 team in the power rating. So just starting from there alone.
Hey, Freedman, real quick, just so people understand, like, how do power ratings work? Where do they come from? What's the origin point for those?
Yeah. So the power ratings are some combination of like manual adjustment and then looking at performance numbers on offense and defense. So looking at things like expected points added, success rate, yards per play. Other people can, layer in even more. But EPA, success rate, and yards per play are the main things that I look at. And then I will admit it, I'm not above looking at what other people are doing. And, especially like bettors who I respect, and, people who publish their power ratings, and getting a sense of where they are power rating certain teams to kind of see, all right, am I generally above consensus, below consensus? Because generally that will also give me a sense of kind of where I am in relation to the market. And so, normally it's just looking at what a team has done and some sort of combination, this year with prior performance, and then just kind of looking at the numbers there and then correlating that to how teams normally fare against other teams. So,
awesome.
So just based on the power ratings we have for the Eagles and the Giants, we have them already as 9.5 points apart from each other. And, the Giants, I will admit, like they are a team, I was looking at these numbers yesterday. They are a team that I am relatively low on compared to the market. And maybe that's just me being a little bit slow to move on Jackson Dart, who has looked, only 4 games of data that we have for him, but he has looked better the past 2 games versus his first 2 games. But also, like, these teams, they just played 2 weeks ago. The Giants were at home and they lost to the Eagles 34-17. Like, I don't think like I'm out of line really, like in terms of reality of saying like, I think this is more like 11. But so we start with the power ratings, and I will say kind of big picture, divisional road dogs, like that is a spot where we want to be. And it's kind of big picture general statement. Underdogs have been the sharper side over the past 20 years. Now there can sort of be, like
now Freeman on that line, it was the Giants winning that game 34-17.
Wait, yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I just wanted to throw that out. I just had to search it. And honestly, I had a little hot flash because I was like, I wrote it up the other way in my rankings article, which just published. So let me make sure I have this right.
Yeah, you're correct. Okay, so, you're correct.
Yeah, okay.
So yes. Yeah. So anyway, now I look like an idiot, but
no. Well, no, the power ratings are still the key driver here. And again, like it's, just to kind of keep it a little bit conversational, like in a 1-game sample, anything can happen.
Right.
And so one of the key things that I've looked at, and I've been working on projections and I've been working on rankings for the last 3 years. You and I, we talk about this stuff all the time, but the longer you do it, like honestly, a big part of like feeling like you start to kind of, I don't want to say it's a moment of enlightenment, but it really is. It's when you start to accept the volatility, but understand that overall, over the long term, you should still be hearkening like what am I from like the 1850s? Who says hearken? But like you really want to.
Yeah. Were you reading Lord of the Rings earlier today?
Yeah, exactly. I think I did do a Lord of the Rings tweet yesterday with Gollum, and no one gets it. Kids are already too young for it, Freeman. But the main point I was going to make is like, ultimately over time, like you really are trying to stay, connected and grounded, and power ratings and things like that, I think help us. And then you've got these other big trends here that are, historical, like that are beyond just a team. So go ahead. Yeah. I know we jumped into a couple of things, but keep going.
No, well, to the point of like kind of historical trends and the Giants winning as underdogs, like divisional underdogs a couple of weeks ago. Like normally long-term underdogs tend to be the sharp side. Unders tend to be the sharp side. And like from a psychological perspective, I think that makes sense. Like people probably overvalue the edge that favorites have because it's hard for them to quantify the difference between good and bad. They just see like, oh, this is a good team. This is a bad team. I'll bet on the good team. And so normally there's a little bit of value on the bad team. And as for unders, people like to bet on things to happen. That's human nature. And so unless you're me, like the wet blanket, but so I think that normally creates value on unders. So I'm not saying that every bet you make should be on underdogs or should be on unders.
Yeah.
But what it means is that there's like this value gravitational pull to those positions. So for favorites or for overs to overcome that gravity, they usually need to have a little more force or power or like some extra edges to propel them into value.
Yeah, it's so funny you bring this up, because so you guys, we're not going to talk about props today. Freeman and I will come back to another show around props because like a lot of what we're going to talk about today ultimately ends up kind of being a large component of how we get to props, because we start with like what the game environment is, all these things, and the betting models handling that. In fact, in my projection model over at Fantasy Life, I use the Fantasy Life betting model by Freedman. I use those lines and those totals actually from him versus just what we have for Vegas. But the reason I was like kind of interjecting here is because Thor last weekend, sent me a text and he's like, because I send out my props every weekend, like my player props. And I'll be honest, I do overs because I know it's what people want because of what you just said. People want to have a fun sweat. And also I realize that betting is very hard. So I just want to enjoy it when I'm doing it. Now, I've been fortunate this year because I'm running hot. Now I know it will run out, but like I've ran very hot.
Crushing. You are crushing on the overs. Yeah.
But I'm mostly putting out overs, but it's hilarious because Thor sent me a text. He's like, hey man, you need to do another one of these threads every week with all numbers. And I responded to him. I think Thor might've thought I was like, dismissing him, but I wasn't. I was just like, I don't care. People just want to bet overs. And like, these are the overs I like for the weekend. So like, let's have some fun. Let's bet them. Let's see where the chips land. But also there's always responses in there. It's like, got any unders? There's always like 4 or 5 people under, and they're probably thinking this guy's a complete moron. His luck is going to completely run out because of what you just talked about. These historical trends that really do say that unders and underdogs are the better bets.
Yeah. Well, so, this comes back to the Giants here as, the underdog. And, I will say, dogs versus favorites. If you just kind of blindly bet either one, you would be losing money, but you would be losing less money if you bet dogs versus favorites. Dogs, just in general, a minus 1.1% ROI, favorites, a minus 4.1% ROI. So generally, you want to lean towards the dog. And then you add on other factors. Road dogs have actually been profitable, a 0.4% ROI. And then divisional road dogs, a 4.1% ROI. So literally, like if all you had done the past 20 years was just like post on social media, oh, hey, this week I'm betting these divisional road dogs, people would eventually be like, oh man, this guy is a sports betting genius, right? So I'm saying like the Giants are in that spot of being divisional road dogs, but there are enough factors in our model that like the Eagles to kind of push them above that gravitational pull of divisional road dog spot for the Giants. And so one of those factors is home field advantage. And home field advantage, like everyone sort of like kind of quote unquote like knows about it. They know that like, oh, you've got your power ratings and then you put home field advantage into it. And if that were all that someone had for a sports betting model, that would be like 75% of the way there. You know what I mean? But there are a lot of wrinkles to home field advantage that like people maybe don't know about or don't think about. And just based on kind of research of this one site, NFELO, by Robbie Greer, fantastic website. That guy's a data scientist who does his own research. Michael Lopez, who actually works for NFL and is a data scientist and will publish papers on this. You can kind of start to get a sense of like different wrinkles of home field advantage. And so the big things that go into it, kind of outside of like, the sort of team by team, oh, this team has a really strong home field advantage, this team has a weaker home field advantage. There are some kind of universal factors, and they are they playing a divisional opponent? If so, home field advantage is cut not quite in half, but almost in half. Like that is a really big factor. Are they playing a team in the same conference? If so, a small deduction. Are they playing a team that has a home field with the same surface? If so, a pretty big deduction. Are they playing a team that plays in the same general environment? So is it an outdoor team hosting an outdoor team? If so, home field advantage is diminished. So you kind of look at those factors and you balance them.
So like basically the more similar the away environment is to their home environment, the less advantage. Exactly. Then it becomes more just crowd, but less of the other unfamiliarities.
Yes, exactly.
What about for the Cowboys Stadium, Freedman, and the sun? Or that's just against both teams, so it levels everything.
we don't factor that in. I mean, in theory,
I found something you don't factor. I can't believe it.
Yeah. In theory, the Cowboys should have an advantage there, and maybe they do. But I don't know.
If they closed the curtains like when it was their drive, and then opened it like when the opposing team actually was on their drive, like, and would have the sun, obviously it would only happen in certain quarters of the game, but then it could be then that could actually be something that benefits them, but they don't do that. And they don't have big enough curtains, I guess. So
it's next level. I wish they almost would do that just to see if the league would penalize them. But so we're looking at the Giants as road dogs, divisional road dogs. You would think they're in a great spot, but home field advantage with Sirianni and Hurts, there has been a big split in home field performance for the Eagles when they are favored versus when they are dogs. So Sirianni against the spread as a home favorite, 21-13-1 for 17.7% ROI. And like that mark is one of the better historical marks of the past.
And that's all years. Obviously with Hurts, because he's had Hurts the whole time.
Almost all of that is with Hurts. There are a couple of games without Hurts, but those splits are the same as with Hurts.
And list them again. What were the splits on that?
21-13-1 against the spread.
And notice Freedman just said that's really good, guys. 21-13. I think some people, when they think about betting Freedman, they're like, oh man, like really good would be like 25-5.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the thing is so that is actually, that's one of the best historical marks of the past 20 years. And then you compare that to Sirianni as a home dog where he's 1-5 against the spread. And so you kind of like put those two splits next to each other. And it's like, okay, and this isn't a split that you see on the road. This is a home thing for the Eagles.
Weird.
Yeah, right. It is a home thing for the Eagles. And my theory, and Dwain, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. My theory is that Eagles fans turn quickly on the team when they are home if things aren't going well. Like they will boo them at halftime if they are losing. Like I think they turn on their team at home faster than almost any other fan base. So I think they actually have a diminished home field advantage as dogs. But like, what are your thoughts on that? Because like, there are some things that I see in the data and I'm like, that's random. And then other things I see in the data and then I start to think about it. And I'm like, is there some signal here? And it's like, you know what? Like just watching games anecdotally, Eagles fans, like how many times have we seen them boo Sirianni exiting the field at halftime? Like, it's like, wait a minute, there actually might be something here.
Yeah. My gut says random, but anecdotally, I can identify with what you're saying. So I think and again, this is another one of those scenarios, like when I'm working through projections and I'm working through rankings, you're doing the same thing. There is an intuition, guys, that you start to gain from doing it for so long, and little nuances like this can, pop up. Like, I don't know for sure. Like, number one, even with the data, it's such a small sample, we don't know.
Right.
I mean, you said 1-5, that's 6 games.
Yeah.
I mean, they've only been underdogs at home 6 times. So like it could be completely random, even if we thought the data was telling us something. But that's the challenge. And that's actually part of the fun part, Freedman, is that we're ultimately talking about small samples, period. Like even when you talked about the sample of games earlier, against, whenever they're at home and they're, favorites,
21-13-1. And you're like, that's still, I mean, so the thing is, we're always
relatively speaking, it is.
Yeah.
Because we only get so many games.
Yeah.
But
So it's a thing of one, trying to balance the small samples. If this were like a 1-year thing, I would give no credence to it. But we're like in like year 5 of Sirianni, to where it's like, I feel like there's enough there for me to make some sort of judgment. And then the thing is, I'm still not giving all that much weight to it.
That's what I was going to ask. So how much of a factor does that? Yeah. How much does that weight in?
Yeah. It's just like, honestly, it's an additional like quarter of a point. So it's like, it's not It's not like, oh, this is the one thing that is really pushing the projection. It's just a small factor, so it's like you're still trying to weight it in proportion to what it is worth. So there's the factor of home field advantage. And then also the Eagles lose some home field advantage because they're in division, but they play on different surfaces than the Giants, which is almost as important. So the home field advantage for the Eagles in this spot is still largely intact. And then you look a little bit at travel. It's the second straight road game for the Giants. They're third in 4 weeks. That's not like a massive factor, but collectively those things matter, like home field advantage and then the travel on top of it, that matters.
Historically, Freedman, so you say it matters here, but are there any big trends that people need to really be, aware of, regarding travel, like from a league-wide perspective?
Yeah, like league-wide perspective, let me get into the travel table here. So there are some spots where you don't see it all that often, but now that we have the 17 game season and one conference will get one extra home game, that means the other conference ends up being at these travel disadvantages. And so you'll have some teams that are playing, this is their 5th road game in 6 weeks. Like you will end up seeing some spots like that. And that is just massively negative for those teams. Historically, when you've seen teams like that, I wouldn't say it's like an auto bet against them, but it is such a massive.
What do we think causes it? Is it just the fact that they're not getting the home field advantage, or no, it's actually the impacts of traveling over and over and over, and I'm guessing distance and all that kind of stuff this.
Yeah, distance gets factored into it. So within the model, we have the impact of sort of weekly travel and then a rolling 4 weeks. And then we have the consecutive road streaks or, chunks of road streaks. And so I think it's, part of it is just the weariness of traveling. Part of it is it also might impact the ability for the coaches to game plan a little bit. So there might be a number of factors that go into it. It might be harder for some injured guys to rehab if they're traveling. So there could be a number of things. But it matters. Historically, it has mattered. I would just say if they're playing 2 games in a row, so 2 games in a row on the road, that's worth a quarter of a point. It's not that big. If it's 3 out of 4, it's worth half a point. The further out you go, the more drastic it is to where damn, this team hasn't played at home since a month and a half ago, right? The further out you go, it's almost like cluster injuries, the larger the impact is. Home field advantage here for the Eagles, and then the travel situation, that gets us really close to where we are now. And then the one thing I'll say, the injuries, talked about it before, but I'm making some injury assumptions based on guys who were injured last week, injured during the game. So for offense, center John Michael Schmitz was out last week with a concussion. Wide receiver Darius Slayton, he was out with a hamstring injury. And then the big one is on defense. Edge Brian Burns exited last week with a foot injury, and then edge Chauncey Golston, who's their number 4 edge, he was out last week. So you've got this cluster injury on the defensive line. You've already got starting linebackers who are out, and then some of their backups are also injured. And then in the secondary, they could potentially be without 2 starters in cornerback Paulson Adebo, and then free safety Javon Holland. Both of those guys exited last week, and Holland is an above average free safety, but they could be without 2 starters in the secondary. So that's just adding it all up. That's 2.75 points of value on the defense that they're missing and 0.75 points of value on the offense. And then you add that together, that's 3.5 points. And we are
now, is that already all factored in there today?
That is all factored in there today. And we are 3.5 points off of market. That might be the 3.5 points. You know what I mean? If those guys all end up playing, we are right in line with market. So that's the impact of injuries, monitoring those guys during the week, seeing who's likely to play, who isn't, and making those adjustments during the week. And at the end of the week, once we have all of the practice reports.
So what advice would you give folks, Freeman, like when they're thinking about betting a game like this, where the edge could be coming from injuries that we don't know about? Like,
Yeah.
is it better to go ahead and bet it early in the week because the line is probably going to move once Vegas is more sure? So it's like an early edge you're capturing, or is it more of a, no, maybe you actually should wait a little bit. There's a reason that we're off and it'd be better to bet this closer to the game time. Like how do people approach that?
Yeah. So I think that the betting market is not as good at capturing injury information. So
That's an edge. Yeah. And you mentioned that to start.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I would say that I would rather be certain on the injury information and then use that. But if I think I have some sort of like early lean that might be kind of backed up by history of like, okay, normally if a guy exits a week with an injury, if it's a significant, like if it's hamstring, if it's knee, if it's something like that, it's like, you know what, there's a pretty good chance he's out the next week. Let's just go ahead and project him out. And then if I'm wrong and we see that he's a full practice on Wednesday, then we make the adjustment. But I would rather kind of be aggressive early on with the injury projection and assumption and then have to make the change later than assume the guy is going to play and then have to deduct him. So I would, but again, so if you have that early lean and you think your edge is on the injury, maybe you bet that early if the market is going to move. But I honestly rather just wait and know the injury information for sure.
Okay, good stuff. All right, so first 5-star bet of the week is actually taking the Eagles here to cover this spread.
Yeah.
You know, based on the model and Freedman. And the main reasons why are, one, the power ratings. So just because, again, just to summarize, guys, because if you're trying to think about how you apply this, like moving forward, and this is kind of an evergreen, thought process you can use, obviously we're looking at the quality of the teams, but then the home field advantage, which gets taken away a little bit because it is a situation where the Giants do play in the same division, but because it's a different surface and those things like Freedman mentioned, that is getting factored in here as well. And then we've got the history of the divisional road dog that gets factored in as well, which is actually helping the Giants a little bit, but these other factors are overcoming it. And then the final thing here, and tell me if I missed anything, Freedman, but it's really the injuries. The injuries are a massive part of this right now for the Giants.
Yeah, the injuries are a big factor in this for sure.
Okay. All right, so we'll stick with the same game here, and I will get this back over on the screen for you guys. But now we're going to take a look at the team total on this one, which, Freedman, you've also got as a 5-star bet. Like I mentioned earlier, we're projecting this at a 46.4 game total, and 43.5 right now is where the odds makers have it. So plus 2.9. Let's talk about the factors you're seeing here.
Yeah, so let's start with the underlying data. So we look at a blend of prior performance and year-to-date performance, again, on EPA, success rate, yards per play, and putting all that together, you can come up with sort of like a percentile value for the offenses and the defenses, and then you can convert that into the number of points per game that you would project for that team. So for the Eagles offense right now, just based on the blend of everything, they're a 52.8% offense, 22.8 points per game is what we would project. The Giants defense, a 63.5% defense. And the higher that percentage is, the better it is for the opposing offense. So the Giants defense, we would project at 25.3 points per game in terms of what they would allow. So you blend that together, and for this game, we have a projection of 24.8 points for the Eagles. You do a similar exercise for the Giants offense, the Eagles defense, and we get 22 points projected for the Giants. So you add that together, 46.8 points is what we're projecting, and then we make adjustments from there. And the big factor for this game is, I still think, the injury issues. We talked about the defensive injury issues earlier for the Giants and how potentially they could be without edge Brian Burns. They could be without rotational edge Chauncey Golston. And then they could be without 2 starters in the secondary. And then also similarly for the Eagles, they could be without edge rusher Azeez Ojulari, who at this point is a starter for the team based on all of the other injuries, all the other issues they've had at the edge position. Similarly, on the defensive line, they could be without defensive tackle Moro Ajomo, who exited last week with a concussion, and then they could be without starting cornerback Adoree Jackson. Now, like someone might say Adoree Jackson sucks, and it actually might be better. But if you think Adoree Jackson sucks, just wait till you see Keely Ringo. So it's like, it's still a situation where it's not good for the Eagles defense for them to be without a starter in the secondary, and they could be without 2 starters on their defensive line. So you add all of that together, the injury issues for the defenses really help solidify the projection. And then you look also at the forecast, which the weather tends to be, or like the game environment tends to be one of the main things that can impact the total. And so we have these various factors taken into account, but we're still early enough in the year looking at the forecast to where game environment is probably not going to be that big of a factor. So 6 miles per hour for the wind is what we see in the forecast right now. Like, that's fine. There's no adjustment for that. 58 degrees, like only the smallest of deductions for that.
Hey, Freedman, real quick. So you mentioned here, like 6 miles per hour of wind is not a factor, but like historically, like if people are wanting to look at the wind, I know you've had some really interesting findings here versus kind of where the market sits on where the wind starts to matter. And then you also have really looked at, there's actually spots where the market's probably overreacting to what's going on with the weather. So for those folks really looking for like that macro kind of big take on weather, what's going on here with the wind and what have you found in the data?
Yeah. So kind of big picture, there are a couple of different ways of kind of thinking about like modeling, and one is like you just sort of build it on historical game data or like not market data. Another is you kind of look at the market and you try to see where the market has mispriced something or not taken it into account. I kind of like to blend the two, but like looking at weather and the market specifically, and looking at wind, 0 to 4 miles per hour, great circumstances, right? Like a total under those circumstances should actually get a little bit of a boost based on what the market has had for the past 20, 25 years. 5 to 9 miles per hour is neutral. When we get to 10 miles per hour, like double digits, that's where it gets really interesting. Almost everyone, like even now, like sports bettors, I talk to fantasy people, they say that 15 miles per hour is what matters. And I've heard that number for years. And then I looked at, historical betting numbers, and it's like it creates this little bucket of value from 10 to 14 miles per hour in terms of the under, because 10 miles per hour, just based on the historical data, like that is what has mattered relative to the market thinking that 15 miles per hour is what matters. So 10 to 14 miles per hour, we downgrade the total relative to the market. But then at 15 to 24 miles per hour relative to the market, we actually give a slight upgrade because
so funny. So there's an underreaction from 10 to 14, and there's an overreaction from 15 to 20.
For 15 to 24 historically, based on, the betting.
That's a great nugget.
Yeah. Because people have overvalued the impact of wind in that bucket. And then it gets to 25 miles per hour. And at that point, it is a massive downgrade. It's like a downgrade to the point of like, it's almost an auto bet on the under. Not quite, but it's like, because I think people see 15 miles per hour and they think, oh, that's bad wind. And they see 25 miles per hour and they think, oh, that's bad wind. And the market kind of reacts the same, but there is a massive difference between those two numbers in terms of how they impact the passing game, the kicking game, and maybe also how they impact the willingness of a coordinator to
the way they call the game.
Yeah. So weather matters, but you kind of need to dig into how and where it matters.
The other thing that happens is once a defense knows that your deep passing game is going to be impacted and that you're less likely to do it, that allows the defense to condense around the offense.
Yes.
And the biggest advantage in football, guys, is the unknown. So the more often an offense can keep a defense in a spot where they don't know if it's a pass or a run, the better it goes for the offense. That's why 3rd and 8 is a bad down for an offense. The defense knows they have to pass the ball. The defense also knows they don't need to worry about the underneath receivers. They need to guard basically a little before the sticks and beyond. And then they're just going to rally to the ball if it's underneath. And if it's Tucker Kraft, he's just going to run, and get a first down anyway on you. But it's these sort of things, like, they just start to add up. And so if you're trailing, you're in a game where you're losing. Well, now the defense knows you're much less likely to run the ball. They're already leaning towards playing the pass, no matter what happens. So it is interesting, and weather does really have an impact on that. And so the more the defense has a lean towards what you're going to do, the tougher it is for an offense, which I think, it's kind of common sense, but we lose that sometimes. We lose how much that matters. So I think it's a great point. What about temperature? When does temperature matter versus not?
Yeah, temperature is also really interesting. So 60 degrees or above, that's like perfect football weather. There's no sort of deduction or anything made on that. 33 to 59 degrees is just a small deduction. And I know that's sort of like a big bucket, but these are like professional athletes, whatever. They're used to it. At 59 degrees, it's like, that's really pleasant weather. So just, there's always a lean to the under. And so you add just a little bit more to that. 30 to 32 degrees is really fascinating. There's sort of like the 10 to 14 mile per hour bucket. There's this little bucket of 30 to 32 degrees where there's more value on the under. Because it's like, all right, you start to have like the potential for snow, freezing rain, whatever it is. It's colder at that point. So there's more of a deduction. And then I will say there's the overreaction, just like the overreaction that you see for the wind in 15 to 24 miles per hour. There's the overreaction to cold weather that's 15 to 29 degrees. And we actually make a pretty big upward adjustment relative to the market for 15 to 29 degrees, because historically the market has really overreacted to the impact of cold weather in that bucket. And then 14 degrees or below, no adjustment. The market has been correct historically on that.
So unlike when there is a pocket of value, then there's the overreaction, then there's the auto downward.
Yes.
With temperature, it's really, okay, we're a little bit down, we're a little bit further down, and then there's the overreaction, and that
it is a big overreaction.
And then it's a big overreaction. Okay. So what about, is there a cluster impact between those things? So you like to talk about the cumulative effects. So what if it's windy and cold? Is that worse? Or windy and wet? Like, have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've looked some into it, and normally a lot of these things accompany each other, not always, but sometimes, right?
They go together anyway. So.
Yeah. So normally there's some sort of a cluster on this. I haven't found enough, like a large enough sample on it to where I want to add cumulative things on top of it. Right now, we just take it one by one, like one factor at a time in the model.
So what about, just real quick before we'll finish this game up, but the weather stuff is so great. And again, we want to make sure we hit these points. What about precipitation?
Yeah, precipitation, it certainly matters, but only when it's like really heavy. And we've humidity isn't the same thing as precipitation, but they're correlated. And in the database that I have, like, we have the historical information for humidity. So that's what we go on. But if it's 80% humidity or above, there is a half a point deduction for that. But again, it's only half a point. It's not like a massive driver. It's not the way it doesn't impact the way that really big wind does, or the way that the market has overreacted to a cold but not like frigid game.
Okay. So basically high humidity, or AKA I can't say AKA because they don't always go together, but massive, like downpour,
Yes.
When you see the massive downpour, just a little bit of rain. Now, obviously, I do think there are like certain quarterbacks that it might impact more than others.
Yes.
You and I, being from Dallas, there was always the narrative around Troy Aikman, and he's come out and validated. He's like, I couldn't throw a wet ball. Now he did in the biggest game of one of the biggest games of his life. He did throw a wet ball and it was fine. But it is interesting that some players do get, and I don't know if that's a hand size thing or whatever, or just a preference, but it does impact some players more than others. So,
and you know what? I want to add on to that. I would say sort of like the iterative versions of the model would be looking at things like that, like specific quarterbacks, looking at hand size, looking at the ability to grip the ball in different types of weather, and then adding some wrinkles into where we make adjustments for that. That would be sort of like, the like version 2, version 3 of the models. And then one more thing I'll add on top of this, because like we've got, Bye-Mageddon this week. Teams coming off of the bye historically have driven the total a little bit towards the under. That kind of, I think, makes a little bit of sense of like, maybe they're just a little bit rusty coming off of the bye.
Oh, I would think it would be the opposite. Like you're super prepared for the team you're about to play. Like your coaching staff got to make changes to your offense that maybe you didn't have time to make before, or your defense. And now you got the 2 weeks so you can implement some new things. And then there's also the factor like having that much more time to get ready for your opponent. I would feel like it would be the opposite.
Maybe, but I would say that based on, and I'm forgetting exactly who wrote up a paper on this. Maybe it was Michael Lopez, but kind of looking at the benefits of rest. And because there have been changes in the amount of practice time based on sort of like negotiations with the players union.
The NFLPA. Okay.
Yeah. Like you don't really get like 2 weeks of practice or 2 weeks of like preparation with the team over the bye. You like the guys rest.
I think the coaches get that.
The coaches.
It's counteracted potentially by the time off the players get.
Yes. Okay. And you still have your defensive players getting healthy over that time. And maybe that helps with the total a little bit. But It's just like on a per team basis, it's not a massive downgrade. It's just a quarter of a point. But if you have 2 teams playing each other off of the bye, you would kind of take a deduction relative to the market of a half a point.
Maybe I just anecdotally, I just, all of the, hey, Andy Reid off the bye, those sort of narratives, like probably are what's stuck in my head. And then like hypothetically speaking, like it did like kind of pass the sniff test, like the way I had thought about it traditionally. So that's really interesting. Okay. So we've got the Eagles over, or the Eagles Giants game. We've got the over here. We've also given you guys taking the Eagles to cover. And so let's move to another game here, Freedman. Let's go and for the components that we've already hit, what I would say is you can just mention them again, but we don't have to go into the details of. So if we've already talked about home field advantage and like how it works, we don't have to hit it again. But if there's another factor like that's going on, and I think certainly this is a really good example. The Cowboys going to play the Broncos, and maybe it is worth just quickly reiterating those home field advantage things, because I think those are some of the big factors you're seeing here. And as far as the bet goes, we're looking at this right now, guys, as the market has the spread at 3.5 points for Denver, and Freedman, the wet blanket. He just doesn't want to be hurt by the Cowboys. I'm promising you, this is somewhere in the model, guys. Like there's this Freedman just like emotionally hedging himself. 6.5. Yeah. So an additional 3 points to the Broncos. So Freedman, go.
So let's just start with, this is almost all home field advantage. The Broncos have a legit home field advantage. Now it's bigger earlier in the season. But like a legit home field advantage, in part because of the elevation, right? Like teams can struggle, and I think they struggle earlier in the season when they're not quite in football shape going to Mile High Stadium. But over the past 5 years, the Broncos have the number 2 home field advantage in the league. Over the past 16 games, the number 1 home field advantage in the league. And you kind of look at like the historical all-time numbers, and they have like a top 5 home field advantage. So like it is just kind of on its own a legit home field advantage.
So do teams in your model, it does look specifically at the team, and that's a component. Like if they've been really good in their home field advantage, and earlier I know you mentioned it does look at whether they were an underdog or a favorite. And so it's also looking at that and home field. But Denver, what you're saying here is like, that's a huge factor. It's just the fact that they have been so good at home.
Yeah. Just Denver on their own, just period. Who's
the next best? Like, out of curiosity, like, do you have it? The next best home field advantage?
Do you want to guess on who has had the home field advantage, like sort of top 2 home field advantage
Chiefs.
over the past? No, Chiefs. No? Honestly, one of the worst over the past.
Oh my gosh, I'm terrible. That's why you lead betting, not me.
The Dan Campbell Lions, which I think makes so much sense. Like Lions fans are like rabid, and they finally have a team to care about.
Well, they have a good team.
Yeah. They
Let's go back and look at this like 5 years ago.
Yeah. But
it's kind of like Seattle. Seattle used to have this, right? And then now they don't.
Seattle has now one.
That's why the Chiefs is a weird one. You would just think they're good, and it's known as a stadium that's loud. Okay, anyway, sorry. They
used to have a strong home field advantage, and they've had one of the worst over the past 5 years. Same thing. Since the Legion of Boom era with the Seahawks, they've had one of the worst home field advantages. Like post Legion of Boom, they've had one of the worst. So it's really
nothing to do with the crowd noise.
Yeah,
maybe you can't completely eliminate it, but I mean, it's not a driving factor, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But so home field advantage. And then this is the situation where you have a strong home field advantage, and then there's nothing that gets taken away from it. So strong home field advantage for the Broncos, and then they're playing a Cowboys team that is not in the same division, not in the same conference, that plays indoors instead of outdoors, and plays on turf instead of grass. Like this is the nuts. Max. Yes, this is the nut spot for this home field advantage. And like, I don't actually want to say in terms of like the number of given like the extra, because it's a split. There's sort of like the base home field advantage. And then it's like, if you're in division, it gets cut. If you're out of division, it gets added to a little bit. So they have the strong home field advantage, and then they have all of these little additions on top of it. So like, that's the difference. Like that on its own, like I'm sure in terms of the power ratings, we're pretty close to market in terms of like injuries, all of the other things, but also this is the second straight home game for the Broncos. So a little bit of an addition there, but like, that's the difference. Like a maximized true home field advantage. That is one of the best home field advantages in the league. That's the difference.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to hear this. I don't think I can really share this with my family, which will be, hey, go bet on the Broncos. But you guys did hear it. And great takeaways. Like, honestly, I think this was a great one for the home field advantage, because you talk, just quick summary, guys. The Broncos are really good at home, and the elevation is huge, but then all the other factors working out perfectly.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, I would guess though, with something like this is a line you would bet earlier in the week, because we're not waiting on really additional information.
Exactly.
It's like, okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're not waiting. And I will say earlier in the week, I think more shops had this at 3 versus 3.5. That would have been the time to bet it. And then also one more thing. In the outline, I'd put this in a different spot, but now is the time to mention it. There are some key numbers, and like you wouldn't really get the signal for this if you're looking just at kind of like creating a model based on historical game information and production and stuff like this. But you could capture this information if you're looking at a model that incorporates sports betting information. And so there are some historical spreads where it has been like the sign of like where a team is based on the market. And so a 2.5 point underdog, I just kind of like want to walk through like the mental.
Yeah. No, this is great
exercise of this. So a 2.5 point underdog, let's say the line closes, like what does that number mean? What does it tell you? Well, 3 is a really key number. And what it means is that any time that line might have moved to 3, it got bet back down to 2.5, or maybe it never moved to 3 because the bookmakers knew that if they moved it to 3, they would take way too much action at 3 and have to move it to 2.5. So like, what does that tell you? We're like an underdog that is 2.5 points is probably a strong underdog. And you see that in the data. The most, like, out of all of the different like numerations that you could have for an underdog, plus 2.5 has been the most profitable underdog of the past 20 years. Now look at the opposite side, or like the other side of the field goal. Plus 3.5 has been the worst underdog that anyone could bet over the past 20 years in terms of like amount of money lost. And that's the thing. It's the hook. A lot of bettors will look at that plus 3.5 and they'll think, I'm getting value. But think about what the plus 3.5 means. It means that that underdog was not good enough to close as a field goal underdog. And like, that is pretty significant information. And so you have the Cowboys sitting here as plus 3.5 point underdogs. And like, that is the sign of like, wait a minute. If they were really in this game, they would be plus 3, but they're not. There's not enough market momentum on them to drive them to the field goal. The fact that they are sitting at plus 3.5 is like maybe one of the biggest red flags in all of this.
And what's interesting is, again, like back to hearkening, the market is hearkening to the Broncos also still, all these things you talked about. They're a good defense, even though last week against the Giants, like they nearly lost the game. Like they pulled it out late. Pulled it out late, and all these factors were there. And then now you have a Cowboys team that actually, theoretically is a way, way, way better offense than what you have with the Giants. And yet this number is still sitting at that 3.5, which, because I think logic would tell you, especially in a situation like this, Freedman, you're just like, okay, I even wrote this in my matchups piece. I was like, okay, Patrick Surtain can cover one person. Dak Prescott's playing amazing. He's still going to have two other guys, and Riley Moss stinks.
Yeah.
So, like, how are the Broncos ultimately going to slow? I do have the Cowboys, projected for less than normal, against the Broncos defense, but I didn't go wild with it. But still.
And here's the thing. I just talked about how awesome this home field advantage is, and the fact that the Cowboys are 3.5 point underdogs, and that's like the scarlet letter. And then it's like, I mean, they still got like a 45% chance of winning this game. You know what I mean?
You're these 5% edges, that you're looking for, like, are ultimately, and I think, Freeman, the key here is like, if you're really going to be a profitable bettor, like, you got to determine, what are you trying to get out of betting? Yeah. Are you trying to have fun with it? Are you trying to have a good sweat? And if you're doing that, like, then I think you can take some of these things, fine, great, you may use it, but like, you're just trying to have fun. But ultimately, like, for the data that you're creating, right, and the data that you're putting together to use the model, like, the way it really pays off is you're making these bets repeatedly, over and over and over and over. Then over 100 bets, that 5% edge becomes something in any one game, and you can run cold. So you have to keep betting it, because if you don't, and you kind of lose your compass, like, then it's like, okay, great. Like, you bet at the time it didn't work. And then you didn't bet at the time it did work. Like, it's like, ultimately it's like you have to have some discipline. Like, if your ultimate goal is to make money at the betting. Yeah. But anyway, okay. So let's go to, which game you want to hit next? You want to talk Steelers and Packers?
Let's do Steelers Packers.
All right. So I'm going to put this over on the screen for you guys, because this one, like, honestly, it like caught my attention first. And I mean, it started the DM chain between Freedman and I yesterday. I mean, I was like, is this right? Is this right? And so I'm going to scroll down here, and we've got the Packers at the Steelers, guys. Yeah. And Vegas has this line at minus 0.5 in favor of.
That's right? Where we have it.
Oh, sorry. We have it. Yeah. Sorry. Vegas has this line at plus 3 for the Packers. But we have it. Freedman has it at minus 0.5 for the Steelers. So that's a 3.5 point swing, Freedman. And you're saying the Steelers should be the favorites here at home versus the Packers being a 3-point favorite on the road.
Yeah. So this gives me more, like, there are some things where it's like you do the smell test and it's like, okay, I like this. Like, I just know there is a certain type of professional sports bettor that has been betting for like 25 plus years, and they almost would not care what the number is. They would be on the Steelers in this spot. Like, I just know. And I would know that like for months in advance, like, you know, they're the type of bettors who like really like to look at the schedule for each team. And like, I just know they have had this circled since the schedule came out in May, like this game specifically.
Why?
So you have the quote unquote like revenge spot for Aaron Rodgers,
Okay.
but that's not even factored in. The real thing is like, this is a classic Mike Tomlin spot. So they are at home where the Steelers have a legit home field advantage. And, you know, it's not really diminished because they're playing outside of division, outside of conference. So like it's a reasonable home field advantage. And then I will say this is a random item, but home field advantage is amplified for Sunday Night Football. And like, it's historically, like, this is borne out in the data. And even like Billy Walters mentions this in his book. So you have the Steelers Sunday Night Football, they've got a real home field advantage. And then that's amplified just a little bit more by the fact that this is a Sunday Night Football game. And then you have the Steelers as underdogs. They have been awesome under Mike Tomlin as underdogs. But basically, you could say everything profitable that Mike Tomlin has provided to sports bettors, and then everything profitable that Aaron Rodgers has provided to sports bettors, it's happened with them as dogs. Like this is the nut spot. Home dogs. And then
real quick, Freeman, earlier you talked about 2.5 as a dog being really good, 3.5 being a bad spot historically, but here we're at a 3. What does history say? Is that just kind of just let the other factors take the wheel?
You know, 3 has actually been profitable. It hasn't been as profitable as the 2.5. And it's at the point where I kind of like went back and forth on whether to give any sort of like upgrade in the model for that number. And ultimately I decided not to. It would have been a small upgrade, but like historically, dogs of a field goal have been profitable. So you have that as well. And then I will just say, so like certain types of professional bettors would have been on this spot anyway. And then the Steelers lost to the Bengals, which is just like,
and that really pushes it over the edge.
Like, that was the cherry on top.
And what was the Tomlin thing here? Like what has he been as an underdog?
So Tomlin, as an underdog for his career, 65, 39, and 4 against the spread. That is such a massive delta, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and you got a really big sample on that one across multiple quarterbacks, across all sorts of scenarios, which is pretty cool because we don't get that with because most coaches don't last that long.
Exactly.
So yeah,
like it is a true, it's just like a thing. Mike Tomlin as a favorite, probably don't want to bet it. Mike Tomlin as an underdog, it's just like, I am putting probably too much money on this. And then Mike Tomlin off of a loss, you know, it's not quite as strong, but 60 and 46 against the spread for his career. And then you add in Aaron Rodgers off of a loss, 50, 33 and 1 against the spread.
Now, are all these things captured in the model, or are some of these just things you're telling people?
No, this is captured in the model.
Okay.
Like there are small adjustments that are made for this. But like, that's the difference, you know, like basically this, like I wanted I wanted to make sure that I built into the model something that sort of captured I know there is going to be a very specific type of professional bettor who is on this game. And so it's like the Tomlin spot, the sort of the classic Mike Tomlin spot, home underdog. The only way this could be more of a Mike Tomlin spot is if he were a home underdog coming off of a loss in division, right? That would be the only way it could be more of a Tomlin spot. But this is like the perfect type of quintessential Steelers home underdogs off of a loss. It's just like,
and the primetime game
in the primetime game. Team. And then they have 3 extra days off of Thursday Night Football. It's like you just add all of this together, and it's like, as a matter of principle, I'm betting this game.
Wow. Yeah, I love it because like I don't think most people, I shouldn't say that. A lot of people probably are betting it, but like just for me at a glance, and I spend my every waking hour pretty much researching football, for fantasy football, and just looking at this, like I'm kind of like, the Steelers are overrated. They don't get to the red zone that often. Aaron Rodgers is due to cool off. He's throwing like 2.3 touchdowns or whatever per game, but he's only throwing for 211. Like this is it's kind of a boring offense, but I think sometimes like I have a tendency to get lulled to sleep by like some of the like individual player stuff, like from a fantasy side versus like all these factors. But what I love about it is that it's all baked in and it goes into the projection model because you're already handling it all. And then I'm using those totals, the team totals that are derived from the spread and obviously the betting model, game totals. So anyway, catching it in that way with the projections, which obviously help drive my ranks as well. So I think we have one more bet here, Freeman, for the folks. And it is actually
Falcons.
It's the top here. Yeah. Miami at Atlanta. We have got a 4-star bet here on the team total. So everything we've given up until now has been a 5-star bet. We've given 4 of those. And that was the Broncos to cover the spread. That was against the Cowboys, the Eagles to cover the spread against the Giants. Was it the over or the under? It was the over.
The over
on the game total for the Giants and Eagles. Mm-hmm. And then we just gave the Steelers to cover against the Packers. And the final bet, and this is a 4-star, and that is Miami at Atlanta, and it is the team total, which we've got projected at 47.
Yeah, the game total. So
the game total. Yeah. 47.
Is the market. 47 is the projection.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So break this one down specifically, especially anything that are factors that we haven't, hit already.
Yeah. So, you do the normal kind of starting point of Falcons, decent offense, Dolphins, bad defense. 26.8 points is what we would project for the Falcons. Dolphins, meh offense. Falcons, really strong defense this year. 19.3 points projected for the Dolphins. So that gives us a total of 46.1. And you see kind of like, so we're already at a kind of marked difference above the market. And you can see that the Falcons good offense, the Dolphins bad defense, those are driving the projections. And then you look at the environment.
Hey, Freeman, quick question here. Like, does the model wait for more recent production, or is it just really, no, it's like, hey, we're going to look at the whole season. You're probably even looking at the season before, like coming in, like you've got to make adjustments, but does it get weighted in a certain way where more recent data matters more?
That is a good question. No, it doesn't.
Okay.
And that would maybe be like, next version of the model to where we're sort of weighting it on a rolling week fashion for this year's data. But yeah, so I
will say it might not be necessary because a big part of those drivers that will change things ultimately do come back to injuries. And so you're accounting for injuries, but where it could get you and where it could get the model is as players return from injury.
Yes.
And their performance has been down for like 4 weeks because of it, like back to the Chargers, like how often Justin Herbert's under pressure right now because the starters have been missing. But when they return, like we would still, like the model would need to account for, okay, great. Now he's probably going to face less pressure unless you have a factor that actually bumps things up for players returning to health versus only docking for when players miss.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. So all right, environmental factors. So this is an indoors game, right? So no wind, so you get a small adjustment up. It's a non-divisional indoors game. So indoors, obviously ideal environment, and then non-divisional. Teams don't know each other, and divisional games tend to play a little bit tighter. Non-divisional games play a little bit looser. So there's a boost for that with this being an indoors non-divisional game. Okay. Neither team is coming off of the bye, so there's no bye deduction. This game isn't in prime time, so there's no deduction for that. So that's how we get to the 47. So it's like kind of just a pretty straightforward, like good indoors environment. And then you have a really good Falcons offense going against a pretty bad Dolphins defense. And that's driving a lot of the projection.
So it started at the 46.1, which was really based off the power ratings, right? And like you said, it's Falcons offense against the bad defense for Miami is like the big component.
Yeah.
But then there are the small adjustments for, okay, pristine environment with no win, and then the non-divisional stuff also jumping in, and then that moves it from 46.1 to 47.
Yes.
Okay, sweet. So I think, I mean, this has been awesome, man. No, and I talk with you a lot. We sit down and we talk about projections and things like that. So like, I know you're working on this stuff behind the scenes, but I think this was just a great opportunity to really share. And I mean, honestly, man, I've learned so much from you, like just like as we've talked about this stuff through the years, but even just sitting here on the show, like the number of questions and things that like jump into my head, and like just honestly really impressed, like as someone that builds out models and things like that myself, with like how many factors you have involved. Like it's very, very robust. I picture you as like, you should be like an airplane engineer or something. Like you've got a backup for everything. Oh, right wing flap went out, because of whatever went out. Well, we've got this other, backup plan. Like, planes, like, my father-in-law was an airplane mechanic, and like, so he would talk about this. He's like, there's 10 backups for that. Like if that one thing goes, like there's another backup and there's another back, like your model like has so many things. I guess the one question I would be is like, and this is actually okay. Like sometimes you wonder, like there can be so many things, because I think about this, that like ultimately it just like ends up putting everything back to where it started. Because like it's factor yes, no, yes, and you're like, oh, we're just back to where we started, which is not a bad thing. Yeah, but it's really impressive, man.
Well, it's interesting. Well, one, thank you for the compliments. I would say I can be detailed about trivial stuff, like stuff that doesn't matter. That's the kind of stuff that I would be like, oh yeah, I'm really fascinated by this. So, a betting model, maybe. Designing an airplane, absolutely not. No one would want me being the detail guy on that. But to your point about you put all of this in, and a lot of the time it gets you pretty close to the market. And like, that's actually for me, that's a good sign. Yeah. Like I actually I want a model, because if we were off of market on everything, I would just be like, well, this model is
man.
useless.
It's so funny you say that, because when I first started really doing projections, I would notice like how my things would be so far off. And like, I will say like this year when I go in versus player props.
Yeah.
Because I've got it set up where I do my projections, and as the player props populate, James McCool, who's one of our data guys, like he's awesome. He does work where that just automatically pulls in, and later in the week I can go look at it. And because that's how I start trying to find props for you guys. And it helps me check, because I'm like, okay, maybe I'm off on this player with the market. Maybe I need to adjust their projection. Or I'm like, I'm like, no, I think this is real. But what's so interesting and why I jumped in is just because it's typically the model and the props are very close.
Yeah.
Like, and used to, I would see a lot more variance, between them, but it's like, you pick up on things like as you keep doing this stuff over and over and over. And hopefully, like if you're doing it well, like you're learning, like you're okay. Yeah. You're like, all right, this is something I need to tweak. This is a weak spot in the model. This is a strong spot, or maybe I'm over adjusting here. But it is interesting. Like I agree with that point that you just said. Like for the most part, like you're looking for a model that, is probably going to be in, because we don't want to act like we're smarter than everyone else. There's power right in the markets. But at the same time, we are trying to find edges. So I love this. And like today we talked about there's only 4 5-star bets on the slate.
I'm good with that. Honestly, like we want a projection model that is pretty close to the market, across the board, and then has meaningful difference in a few spots. And then we want to be able to identify, this is why our projection is off from the market. And then
we feel good about it.
Exactly. We want to be able to identify why we're off from the market. And then we want to know, okay, this is something that matters.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, hey man, I really appreciate you jumping on today. Anything you want to throw out there for the people, anything you want to promote you got going on right now, or just anything else here about betting in general? I know you and I will probably circle back maybe in a month, and we might do a show more about that's prop oriented for folks that are more into that sort of thing. But anything that you want to get off your chest before we call it a day?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say check out, the Freedman's Favorites, fantasy articles where, I have the betting model, but then a lot of that just kind of permeates into my mind and informs some of the fantasy plays that I like for this week. So be sure to check that out. We have that out first thing Wednesday morning every week. And then also I will say the betting model and then the player projections that, Dwain talked about. We both work on player projections. And so the betting model and the player projections, all of that you can get with the tier 2 subscription that we have at Fantasy Life. And right now you can get the free, if you've waited this long, we got the payoff for you. You can get the 12-month subscription to Fantasy Life for free by doing the very simple thing of downloading the Comet browser, and there's a specific page on the site where you can do that. And then you get the redemption code. You use
fantasylife.com/Comet, guys. If you go to that, it will tell you the steps that you need to go to. Great call out by you.
It takes 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes. If you do that, you get access to the game model and the player projections for free, like 100% free for the next 12 months. You will not have a better deal than that for a Fantasy Life subscription over the next 12 months. So definitely recommend that you do that.
Yeah, look at you, a company man. FREE, y'all, as I like to say. So that's good stuff. So we will see you guys next week. We'll talk some more data to you. Really appreciate you, Freedman. This was an episode, honestly, after my own heart. Like, you talked a lot of data, you talked a lot of factors, and man, totally respect the grind that you're putting in. So appreciate you coming on. We will see you guys next week.